Hey legends, and welcome to the channel where we're going to learn how to appreciate the very flawed king of sims. Modest introduction aside, one of the most common requests I get is to create a sort of tutorial on how to set up rFactor 2, from getting it looking its best to getting the best content for it. This is completely understandable because the game is a bit of a mess to say the least. It was released in 2013 with an assortment of, shall we say, very rough content. In the years since the game was handed off from its original developers, ISI, to Studio 397, it's been populated with a vast array of higher quality, modern content. The problem? Well, the old content is still dispersed among the new in the game's clunky, ancient UI, and new players have absolutely no idea how to distinguish between the two. And that's where we step in. We're going to go over which content you want to buy in order to start strong in rFactor 2, then follow it up with some free mods you'll want in order to pad out the racing experience. After this, we're going to go through installing the mods, setting up the game to look its best, and then going over some of the finer points of its charming UI to get you up and racing, as well as setting up the fundamentals such as good force feedback. Hopefully this will be the kickstart some of you newer members to the rFactor community need to get you up to speed quickly with the game, which has some of the, if not the best racing physics out of anything on the consumer market. If you know how to weed through the old, outdated content to find gems, rF2 can give you a virtually unparalleled virtual racing experience. Okay, so you've purchased vanilla rFactor 2 on Steam and got it installed. Now, the first thing you want to do is fill it with good content. Head on over to rFactor 2's store page and click on Items Available for this game. This brings up its extensive official DLC collection, which represents much of the premium content available for the game. To get the most bang for buck, I would recommend heading over to packs and starting with the GT3 pack and Endurance bundle. At the time of this video, this will net you 11 GT3 cars, 4 GTE cars, 2 LMP cars, and a McLaren Senna GTR, because it's so important it deserves its own class. This is more than enough to get you a solid mixed grid for endurance and sprint racing. The GTE cars recently got a balance of performance update, with the GT3s soon to follow. And as of the time of this video, it represents the best and most up-to-date content in this game as far as physics and graphical materials are concerned. Next, we'll want some tracks to race them on. Head on down to the track expansion bundle. This is an absolute must. These are not only the 4 best tracks in rFactor 2, but they're among the best tracks in sim racing, period. The entire Nürburgring, Le Mans aka Circuit de la Sarthe, Sebring, and Circuit d'Azur aka Monaco. Aside from not getting the licensing to use the Monaco name, these 4 tracks are all fully licensed, integrated content that is meticulously laser scanned with millimeter precision and recreated virtually to crazy detail. If you gave me Sebring and Nürburgring alone, I would probably have enough to keep me racing for the next 5 years. Okay, so that's the premium content out of the way. Now we're going to get a little cheeky and download unofficial versions of Spa and Bathurst. If you take the links down in the description, that will lead you to the download packages for these tracks. Download them into your Steam/Steam Apps/Common/rFactor2/Packages folder. Now, let's pad out our collection with even more nice free content. Head on over to the Steam Workshop for rFactor 2. If it hasn't already been done for you, make sure to subscribe to all the content offered by Studio 397 in there, such as Zandvoort, the McLaren MP4/13, etc, etc. On top of this, you're going to find a whole smorgasbord of cars and tracks, way more than I could ever quality test here. That being said, out of the content I've tried, I can wholly recommend these. The Flat 6 series, Adelaide Street Circuit, Alton Park, Watkins Glen, and Bridgehampton. I'm sure there are many more awesome mods which I'm unaware of. If you have any favorites, be sure to list them in the comments down below so other people can see. Next, boot up the rFactor 2 launcher. Click on the contents icon. Now run down and make sure to install anything that doesn't have the installed checkmark next to it. If you don't do this, Spa and Bathurst won't be listed in the game. Now click the settings icon. Go to video settings. Set your monitor's resolution and refresh rate. Anti-aliasing level 3 should be fine. If you have performance issues, drop this back. Post effects on Ultra. If you have performance issues, once again, drop this back as well. Anti-aliasing smooths out the jagged edges of the image, while post effects largely deals with the depth of field effects you see during replays and external shots. VR enabled or disabled depending on whether you're using a monitor or a VR headset. And now we jump into the game. Once we get into rFactor, we're greeted with its ancient 90s webpage looking UI. That's at least until it's replaced by the modern one, which should hopefully not need this tutorial. If it's your first time setting up the game, make sure to go to Options, set up your controls right here to make sure that your wheel and your pedals and everything is calibrated. Go back to Display, and this is where we fine-tune all of our graphical settings, so make sure all of these are set to full. After this, just double check the settings in the video res to make sure your resolution is still correct, as is the refresh rate, the anti-aliasing we set in the launcher, and everything else. So, after this is all done, apply your changes, and we go back to the main menu. What you'll want to do here is double check to make sure that all of your installed tracks are still here. Don't be concerned if you don't have the sheer weight of tracks that I do, or that if you have more, I've only installed the ones that I need, and I've got a few excess from the mod community that I don't really race all that often. After this, make sure to check out the cars and do the same thing. I'm of course on the Ferrari 488 because that's all I drive these days, but just double check that you make sure that you have everything that you bought and everything that you downloaded. After this, I'm going to show you guys how to set up a quick single player race session. So click on Session Settings down here, make sure to check Practice and Race. You can also check Qualifying if that's something that you're into on your offline races. You click over here to Practice. You can choose whether you want your practice to be private or whether you want other cars on the field. The start time is obviously the time of day. Practice time is the amount in minutes that you're allowed to practice for. Time scale is normal, anywhere from normal up to 60 times, which is what I run on my 24-hour races in 24 minutes. We'll set this to normal. Now the real road is one that you'll want to learn. So there's a couple of presets here and they all correspond to the amount of rubber saturation on the road. The more rubber you have, the more grip you have on the line. And this is something that's very dynamic in rFactor. It has one of the better dynamic systems where the more cars drive around a given line, the more it rubbers in and the better it sort of gets. Very useful for long form races. Now this is one that you can set to naturally progressing. Get it to rubber in naturally and then save the state when you're in the game. That way when you come back, you don't have to rubber it in from scratch every single time. The way that you do this easily is set the real road timescale to 15 times. It begins at normal, but setting it to 15 allows you to rubber in the road way quicker, especially if you have a full field of cars racing with you. And then from here on out, I would suggest setting the flag rules to black only, for the time being anyway, until rFactor fixes its flag system. Unfortunately, you can actually get a full course yellow that never really gets cleared, can ruin your race. I would just go black only. Fuel usage and tire wear depends on what you're doing. If I'm doing hot lapping kind of stuff, I keep these off. Otherwise, make sure to keep them at normal. Damage multiplier during AI races, I actually keep it 0% because they're so keen on just crashing into you and ruining your race. But if you're doing something more serious, I would of course recommend keeping that at 100%. Aside from that, AI strength to taste, you're going to notice that in rFactor it depends on the track and the car class immensely. So you have to experiment a lot per car, per track, and per class. Aggression, around about 50 should work, but really experiment with your own settings and see what works best for you. Now we're going to jump into a race and I'm going to show you guys how to set up your force feedback. Alright, so this is how we boot up into the game. The very first thing you want to do is go straight into settings, and this is a per car adjustment, so you have to do this every single time you change your car or the car's livery. Now go up here to controls. So in rFactor, we've got three main controls to control the force feedback: the FFB smoothing, the car-specific force feedback multiplier, and the force feedback minimum torque. Now the way you adjust these will depend very heavily on what wheel and settings you're using. Much of the time, if you're running your stock wheel strength, you're going to have to lower the car-specific FFB multiplier by quite a bit. In my experience, it's ranged anywhere from about 0.45 up to 0.8 to 0.9. It really depends on what you're running, but rFactor 2 has extremely strong unfiltered force feedback, so if you're running a direct drive wheel, you want to make sure that this is really tamed down. And if you don't have onboard smoothing like my DD1 has, you probably want to use this at least at 1 because it's very, very very jittery and very detailed in a way that perhaps is more detailed than even real life. Now, the FFB minimum torque is the magic one for you guys on belt and gear driven wheels. On my Thrustmaster T500 RS, I actually found this was best at around about 3 to 3.5%. What this does is lower the lowest forces and the lowest detail forces and the road noise and grain of the game to a point where the wheelbase can actually reproduce them properly rather than getting lost in the, needing to overcome the inertia of the motors and the gears and all that sort of stuff. So because I have a DD wheel, I keep this at 0%, which is what I would recommend for all those of you running direct drive as well. And that about wraps it up for us. Everything else is completely down to the individual, and we have other videos about car setups in rFactor. Everything else you should be able to basically work out for yourself. Thank you guys for bearing with us during this rFactor 2 tutorial. I hope that you got a lot out of it, and I hope you managed to go back and enjoy what I think is one of the best sim racing experiences in all of gaming. So until next time, make sure to hit that sub and join us for future sim racing news and reviews, and of course all future rFactor 2 content. Until then, we'll see you guys later.